What happens when a racist cop abuses his badge and chains an innocent black woman in public? He thinks he holds all the power until the tables turn. And the most shocking twist you'll ever hear is the cop who ends up chained, dragged to the streets to face justice. This isn't just a story about humiliation and power. It's about resilience, courage, and the moment when the oppressed refuses to stay silent. So stay with me until the end, because trust me, the ending will leave you speechless. And if you love stories that expose injustice and deliver justice in the most unexpected ways, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss what's coming next. It was a bright Saturday morning in downtown Atlanta. Families streamed into mall, children tugging on their parent hands, teenagers laughing in clusters, store windows gleaming with summer sales. On the surface, everything seemed ordinary until the moment that would shock everyone who witnessed it. Her name was Danielle Carter, a 32-year-old black entrepreneur. She walked with quiet confidence, dressed in a sharp cream blazer over dark jeans, her hair neatly tied back, a laptop bag slung over her shoulder. She wasn't just there to shop. Danielle had a meeting with a potential investor at the coffee shop inside the mall. Danielle had worked hard for this moment. Growing up in the South, she had seen how her community was often overlooked. Businesses denied loans, promising entrepreneurs dismissed before they could pitch an idea. But Danielle refused to be another forgotten dream. She built her brand from scratch, late nights spent designing products, long days hustling through markets, and now, finally, she was meeting an investor who could take her vision nationwide. But before she could even step to the glass doors of that mall, her life collided with arrogance, racism, and raw abuse of power. Standing just outside the entrance was Officer Brian Matthews, mid-40s, broad shoulders straining against his police uniform, mirrored sunglasses hiding the eyes that constantly scanned the crowd. Not to protect, but to intimidate. Matthews had been on the force for nearly 2 decades, and everyone in his precinct knew him. Not for his heroism, not for his service, but for his temper. He believed the badge made him untouchable, and far too often he used it not to protect, but to humiliate. As Danielle approached, Matthews' eyes locked on her. He stepped forward, blocking her path. Officer Matthews, gruffly, "Hold it right there." Danielle blinked, confused. "Excuse me." "Matthews, I said stop. What's in the bag?" She adjusted the strap on her shoulder. "It's my laptop. I have a meeting inside." Matthews tilted his head, his lips curling into a smirk. "Funny, you don't look like the type to have business in a place like this." People walking past slowed their steps. Sensing tension in the air, Danielle felt heat rising in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "I don't know what you mean, officer, but I'd like to go inside now." Matthew stepped closer, his voice low but laced with venom. "Don't play smart with me. I've seen your kind, always sneaking around, always up to something. Let me check that bag." Danielle's heartbeat quickened, not because she had anything to hide, but because she knew exactly what this was. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't about procedure. It was about power. "I don't consent to you searching my bag," she said firmly. "I've done nothing wrong." Matthew's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in public, especially not by a black woman who refused to bow her head. And then in one swift, shocking move, he pulled a chain from his utility belt. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Matthews roughly grabbed Danielle's wrist. Before she could even react, cold steel clinked around her skin. But this wasn't handcuffs. It was worse. It was a chain, long and heavy, as though she were some kind of animal to be restrained. Mothers shielded their children's eyes. Teenagers pulled out phones, recording. Murmurs rose. "Is this legal? What is he doing? That's disgusting." Danielle's voice shook, not with fear but with righteous anger. Take this off me. You have no right. Matthews yanked the chain, pulling her closer. You think you can talk back to me? I'll show you your place. The humiliation burned hotter than fire. But deep inside, Danielle knew one thing. This moment would not break her. She stood taller, her eyes locking with his, refusing to shrink away. You're the one who should be ashamed, she said, her voice ringing loud enough for everyone to hear. This is what abuse of power looks like. The crowd murmured louder now. Support building, courage spreading. Phones angled closer. Every second was being documented. And in that instant, Matthews realized his grip wasn't as strong as he thought, because Danielle Carter wasn't going to let this end with her chained. No, the tables were about to turn. The chain rattled as Officer Matthews tightened his grip. Danielle's wrist stung. The weight of cold metal against her skin felt suffocating, designed to strip her of dignity. But something shifted deep inside her. Yes, she was furious. Yes, she was humiliated. But beneath it all, Danielle felt something stronger than fear. A fire, a refusal. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Steady, unbreakable. Chains don't define you, baby girl. You define what happens next. She closed her eyes for a brief second, steadying her breath, and when she opened them, there was no more hesitation, only resolve. Officer Matthews leaned closer, his words sharp and cruel. You think you're special? You think the rules don't apply to you? Danielle tilted her head, her lips curling into the faintest smile. No, officer, she said softly. I think the rules finally apply to you. Matthews frowned, confused. He tightened the chain again, jerking her wrist like she was a trophy he had just captured. But Danielle had trained for moments like this. Not this exact humiliation. No one ever trains for that. But for pressure, for control, for knowing how to turn an opponent's strength into weakness. Danielle suddenly dropped to one knee. To the crowd, it looked like she was giving up, submitting to the authority pressed against her. And Matthew smiled. That's what I thought. But what he didn't see, what only the sharpest eyes in the crowd noticed, was how Danielle's wrist rotated, slipping to the narrowest gap of the chain loop. Click, her right hand came free. Gasps rippled through the air. A teenager in the crowd whispered, "Wait, did you see that?" Before Matthews could react, Danielle lunged. Her hand shot forward, seizing the dangling length of chain, and in one fluid motion, she looped it around his forearm. Matthews staggered backward. What the... Danielle yanked hard. The chain locked across his chest. The crowd erupted. Some screamed, some cheered, some raised their phones higher to capture every frame. The predator had just been caught in his own trap. Matthews thrashed. "Let me go," he bellowed. But Danielle didn't let go. Instead, she pulled harder, wrapping the chain in tight circles around his wrist, then across his torso. "You want to chain someone like an animal?" she shouted, her voice ringing through the plaza. "Fine, but it won't be me." The crowd cheered now. Strangers who moments earlier were silent, fearful, were now shouting in solidarity. "Get him, sis." That's what justice looks like. Keep rolling, don't stop recording. Every voice, every phone camera, every angle. It was all evidence. Evidence Matthews couldn't erase. For the first time, Matthews looked afraid. The arrogant smirk was gone. His jaw tightened. His body stumbled as Danielle pulled him forward. "Untie me. This is assault," he barked. Danielle glared at him, her voice cold as steel. "No, officer. This is accountability." And with a final tug, she pulled him face first into the wall behind her. The sound of his grunt echoed. The crowd roared. Danielle didn't stop there. She wrapped the chain once more, tied across Matthew's belt, cinching it so tight he could barely move his arms without choking himself. Now, the roles had reversed. The man who once dragged her was the one being dragged. Step by step, stumble by stumble, Danielle began walking, pulling him forward like the world's ugliest parade. Phones followed. People spilled into the walkway, recording, cheering, some even clapping. Take him to the station, make him answer for it. Matthew's face burned red, sweat dripping down his temple. His voice cracked. "You don't know what you're doing. I'll end your life for this." Danielle turned her head slowly, locking eyes with him. "You already tried. Now it's my turn to finish the story." By now, more than 100 people had gathered. Families who once tried to look away were now standing tall, shouting for justice. Some people live-streamed. Some called the news. Others tagged local activist groups on social media. And in the middle of it all, Danielle walked with unshakable resolve. Every step closer to the police station wasn't just for her. It was for every time someone else had been silenced, every time someone else had been humiliated. Her humiliation was no longer hers alone. It was transformed into power. But the tension only grew, because Matthews wasn't finished. As Danielle pulled him forward, Matthews suddenly shifted his weight, slamming his shoulder into her side. She stumbled but didn't fall. The crowd gasped. "Careful," someone shouted. "Don't let him get loose," another warned. Danielle tightened her grip, pulling the chain across his neck just enough to make him freeze. "Try that again," she hissed, "and you'll regret it." For a moment, Matthew stayed still, but his eyes flicked to his radio, dangling just inches from his chest. Danielle saw it too. If he called backup now, if he shouted for help, other officers might storm him before she reached the station, and she couldn't let that happen. Not yet. With one fluid move, Danielle yanked the radio from his vest and threw it into the crowd. A teenager caught it and raised it triumphantly like a trophy. The plaza exploded in cheers. Matthew's face twisted with rage. "You have no idea what you've started," he spat. Danielle shot back, her voice sharp and unflinching. "No, officer, you have no idea what you've ended." And then she pulled him again, forward, step by step, toward the looming glass doors of the police station just a block away. Every eye followed, every camera recorded, every chant grew louder. The tables had turned completely. But as powerful as that moment was, Danielle knew something terrifying. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was only beginning. Inside the station, other officers were waiting, and not all of them would see Danielle as the victim. Some would see only what Matthews would claim, a civilian attacking a cop. And as Danielle pulled him closer, chains rattling under the weight of poetic justice, she wondered, would the truth survive inside those walls? Or would she walk straight into another trap? And just as Danielle reached the steps of the station, Matthews leaned in, his voice low enough only for her to hear. "You think you've won? You think this crowd will save you?" His lips twisted into a faint, bloody grin. "You're walking into a den of wolves, and I'm their alpha." Danielle froze for a split second, the chain taut in her hands, the crowd chanting behind her, the station looming ahead. For the first time, doubt pricked her chest, but she clenched her jaw, steadying herself, because she knew this wasn't just about walking into that building. It was about walking into history. The world outside still buzzed with the shock of what had just happened. People who had witnessed Danielle dragging Officer Matthews through the streets with his own chain had pulled out phones, recorded, whispered in disbelief, and shouted in support. But Danielle wasn't finished. She had made up her mind. Matthews wasn't just going to face her. He was going to face the entire system that gave him the power to humiliate people like her. And so, with her heart pounding but her grip unshaken, Danielle dragged him into the front doors of the Easton Police Station, the very building where countless complaints from her community had gone unanswered. The station's lobby went silent the moment the doors banged open. Officers behind the desk froze. Citizens waiting in line for forms or to pay tickets stared with wide eyes. Matthew stumbled forward, hands still cuffed, his uniform torn, face flushed red from both anger and humiliation. And behind him, Danielle, fierce, unyielding, her eyes burning with a fire no one had seen before. Every pair of eyes in the room darted between the chained officer and the woman dragging him. It was unthinkable. A black woman walking into a precinct with a white officer, shackled and powerless. Matthew snarled, "Arrest her. She assaulted me. She's insane." But Danielle's voice cut through the room like glass. "Danielle, no. What's insane is that this man thought he could chain me like an animal in front of everyone and get away with it." Gasps. Whispers. Phones went up. Already. The videos were being streamed live. A captain hurried out from the back office, his polished shoes clicking hard against the tile. His face was already stern, his tone clipped. "Captain, what is the meaning of this? Unchain that officer immediately." But Danielle didn't flinch. She tightened her grip on the chain. "Danielle, not until you hear me. Not until everybody hears me. You protect men like him every day while women like me are ignored, silenced, and shamed. Not today. Not anymore." The captain's jaw tightened. Officers shifted uneasily, unsure whether to step in or stand down. And then something unexpected. From the back of the lobby, a young black officer stepped forward. His name tag read Owens. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried weight. "Owens, Captain, with respect, maybe we should hear her out. Because right now, this isn't just a scene. This is the truth walking straight through our front doors. And the world is already watching." Phones lifted higher. Cameras zoomed in. The captain's face flushed red. Danielle felt the moment shift. She had leverage now. Not just a chain in her hands, but the core of public opinion pouring through every live stream. She dragged Matthews forward until he was forced onto his knees in the middle of the lobby. His breath came heavy, sweat dripping down his temple. "Danielle, tell them, Officer Matthews. Tell them what you called me. Tell them what you tried to do." Matthews spat on the floor. "She's lying. She's dangerous." But his words were drowned out by the murmurs of disbelief, the gasps, the sheer weight of what people were witnessing. Danielle turned to the growing crowd. "Danielle, how many of you have filed complaints here? How many times have you been ignored?" Hands went up. Voices rose. One woman shouted from the back, "They never listened when my son was beaten." Another yelled, "I filed 3 times. Nothing ever happened." The lobby became a chorus of long silence grievances. And Danielle stood at the center, the chain in her hand like a symbol of reversal. The captain barked again, "Enough! You're creating chaos." But Danielle's reply struck like thunder. "Danielle, chaos? No, Captain. This is what justice looks like when you ignore us for too long. This is what truth looks like when you bury it. The only question now is, what are you going to do with it?" The captain froze. His officers glanced nervously at one another. The cameras kept rolling. For the first time, Danielle realized she wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She had become the voice of everyone who'd been chained, silenced, or dismissed. And the station itself, the beating heart of the system, was now her stage. Matthews growled, straining against the cuffs. "You'll regret this, Danielle. You don't know who you're messing with. I have friends. You won't last a day after the stunt." But Danielle leaned close, her voice steady. "Danielle, then let them come. Because I'm not backing down. Not from you. Not from this station. Not from anyone." The crowd erupted in cheers, chants, and shouts of support. Phones streamed every second. The captain's hand hovered over his radio, unsure where to call in backup, or surrender to the storm unraveling inside his own walls. And just as the tension reached its breaking point, the heavy doors behind the lobby creaked open. Everyone turned, and standing there was a man Danielle recognized instantly. A man powerful enough to decide whether her defiance ended in triumph or in tragedy. The night outside the police station had grown darker, though the buzzing fluorescent lights above the entrance hummed on like nervous witnesses. Inside, the air was sharp with the sterile sting of bleach and sweat. Danielle sat in the hard chair, her wrists still aching from the steel cuffs that had been yanked off her minutes earlier. She could hear it. Low voices in the next room. The station was no longer ordinary background noise. It felt alive, whispering with the weight of secrets. Matthews was pacing. He tried to project confidence, barking orders at officers who avoided his eyes. But Danielle noticed it. A tremor in his voice, a thin crack in his mask. The humiliation she had dealt him earlier still lingered. His authority had been punctured. Then came the shift. The glass door at the far end of the hall slid open, and a hush fell like a sudden blackout. 3 men entered. Their suits were too sharp, their shoes too polished. They did not belong to the dusty machinery of local police. These were men from higher places, the kind that turned fear into silence with nothing but a glance. Behind them trailed a woman in her early 50s, her stride steady, eyes sharp like a hawk scanning prey. Danielle recognized her instantly. Assistant Attorney General Vivian Kane, a name whispered in news broadcasts, linked with words like corruption probe and federal crackdown. Matthews froze, his face drained. "Kane," he muttered, forcing a smile that never touched his eyes. What an unexpected visit. Vivian Kane didn't smile. She placed a slim folder on the nearest desk, the sound echoing like a gavel strike. "Unexpected," she said. Her voice carried the calm thunder of someone used to watching men crumble. "No, Captain Matthews. This has been building for years." Danielle's heart kicked in her chest. She leaned forward, eyes locked on the woman. For the first time all night, she felt the power in the room shift, ever so slightly, away from Matthews. But Matthews wasn't finished. His pride wouldn't let him fold. "Counselor," he said, almost spitting the word, "this is a police matter. Local jurisdiction. You and your suits don't get to just stroll in here and..." "Enough." Vivian's single word sliced through him. She didn't raise her voice, but it carried an authority that felt immovable. She turned, her gaze landing directly on Danielle. "You're Danielle Walker?" Danielle nodded cautiously. "Yes." Vivian's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in assessment. "You've been through hell tonight, and I'm going to make sure every detail you witnessed is preserved. Every word, every bruise, every threat." The room stirred. Some of the officers shifted uncomfortably. One even looked down, ashamed. Matthew's fists clenched at his sides. "Walker," he said, snapping, "you don't know who you're dealing with. This woman," he pointed sharply at Kane, "she's not here to save you. She's here to use you. You think they care about your rights? Your life? You're just another pawn to them." Danielle inhaled slowly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched as Matthews unraveled, as his desperation began to seep through the cracks of his uniform. "Then maybe it's time," Danielle said finally, her voice steady. "That pawn stopped letting kings dictate the board." The silence after her words felt electric. Even Kane's lips twitched into the faintest suggestion of a smile. But Matthews wasn't beaten yet. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Danielle could hear. "You think this is over? You don't get it. Kane's just one head. Cut her off. Another grows. You're not fighting me, Walker. You're fighting the system. And the system doesn't lose." His breath smelled faintly of bitterness and fear. Danielle held his stare, her pulse quickening. Kane's voice cut in again, firm, unshakable. "Captain Matthews, you're under federal investigation. Effective immediately. You'll relieve the command pending inquiry." The officers gasped. Some glanced at each other. For a brief moment, Matthew's authority seemed to collapse like a house of cards. But then, he laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. It was worse. It was calm. "You think you're in control," he said, his eyes flicking between Kane and Danielle. "You're standing on sand. Everything you believe in, every badge, every law, it's all built on the same rot. You'll drown in it before it ever saves you." And then he leaned in closer to Danielle, so close she could feel the heat of his words. "They sent her because they're scared. Not of me, of what I represent. You think I'm the only one? Walker, I'm just the tip of the spear." Danielle's skin prickled. His words felt too rehearsed to be bluster. Suddenly, the weight of a night took on a larger shape. This wasn't about one man's corruption. It was a web, a network, a chain of power that stretched far beyond the station's flickering lights. Kane snapped her fingers. 2 agents moved forward, gripping Matthews by the arms. He didn't resist. He simply tilted his head back and stared at Danielle. And he smiled. "See you soon," he whispered. They dragged him out, his boots echoing against the tiles. The sound lingered long after the doors shut. Danielle exhaled, but the relief didn't come. Vivian Kane approached her, placing a hand on the desk between them. "You did well," Kane said softly. "Most people break under men like him. You didn't." Danielle swallowed, her throat dry. "He's not lying, is he?" Kane's jaw tightened. "No, he's not." The admission hit Danielle like a blow. She wanted to scream, to demand answers. Instead, she whispered, "Then what happens now?" Kane's gaze was steady, but in it Danielle saw something that unsettled her even more than Matthew's threats. "Out. Now," Kane said. "We decide if you're strong enough to keep going." Danielle froze. The words weren't a comfort. They were a warning. The station around them felt smaller, the walls closer. Kane's agents gathered papers, snapped photos, and whispered into radios. Yet Danielle couldn't shake the feeling that despite Matthews being dragged out, his presence still lingered, like a shadow that refused to leave. Kane straightened, her expression unreadable. "There's someone you need to meet," she said. "Someone who can show you just how deep this runs." Danielle's heart pounded. "Who?" Kane didn't answer. Instead, she turned, signaling to her agents. Moments later, the back door of the station creaked open. 2 figures entered, flanked by shadows. Danielle couldn't make out their faces, but she felt the tension ripple through the room. Kane's eyes met hers again. "This," she said quietly, "is where the real fight begins." Narration begins slow and steady, with cinematic build-up. The night had bled into dawn. Atlanta's skyline glowed in streaks of gold and amber, the early sun crawling up behind the high-rise towers like a promise. Inside the police station, silence weighed heavier than steel bars. Papers from a night's chaos lay scattered, coffee cups tipped over, the air thick with sweat and humiliation. Officer Matthews had slumped against the wall, wrists still chained, no longer with arrogance, but with the pale shock of a man exposed. His badge lay discarded on the floor like a broken crown. And there, standing tall, eyes fierce yet calm, was Danielle Carter. Her blouse was torn from the struggle. Her arms still bore red marks from the cold metal chain. But her spirit was unbreakable. She hadn't just fought Matthews. She had dragged an entire system into the light. The doors burst open. Reporters swarmed in, microphones raised, cameras flashing like a storm of lightning. "Miss Carter, is it true you brought a police officer here in chains? Do you believe the Atlanta Police Department is covering systemic racism? What's your message to women across America?" Danielle didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. Her silence, her posture, Her very presence was an answer. Then she lifted her chin and spoke. This wasn't just about me. This was about every woman who's been silenced. Every black person who's been treated like a criminal in their own country. And it ends today not just with words, but with accountability. Her voice rang out like thunder, echoing through the lobby. The cameras caught it all. America would wake up to Danielle's defiance. But power never yields quietly. Within hours, the state police union issued a statement condemning Danielle's actions. Matthews' lawyers painted him as a dedicated officer caught in an unfortunate misunderstanding. Protesters began gathering outside the precinct, some chanting her name, others waving Blue Lives Matter flags in defiance. The city was splitting in two, and inside the precinct, Danielle was summoned once more. This time not by Matthews, but by State Attorney General Richard Cole, a man whose word carried more weight than any badge. He waited for her in the commissioner's office, tall, silver-haired, with eyes as sharp as glass. Richard Cole looked like the kind of man who built empires on whispered threats. "Miss Carter," he said smoothly, gesturing for her to sit. "You made quite the mess. Officers humiliated, a city divided, and now the world watching. Do you know what that makes you?" Danielle sat, meeting his gaze without blinking. "It makes me someone you can't silence." The corner of his mouth twitched. He admired her defiance, yet despised it too. "Let me be clear," Cole continued, voice low and dangerous. "We can bury this, make it disappear. The charges against Matthews will vanish. The department will tighten its ranks. And you, well, you'll go back to your quiet little life. Or," he leaned forward, eyes narrowing, "you can keep fighting. And if you do, we will destroy you. We'll drag your name through the mud, spin the narrative until the world sees you not as a victim, but as an angry, unstable woman who attacked an officer." The room was suffocating. The weight of centuries of corruption pressed in. But Danielle did not bend. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and placed it on the desk. The screen was glowing red, recording, live streaming, to thousands already watching. Cole's face drained of color. What have you done?" he hissed. Danielle leaned in, her voice steady as steel. "I'm not just fighting for me. I'm fighting for every voice your system has tried to silence. And guess what? The world is listening now." Within minutes, the live stream spread across social media like wildfire. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag justice for Danielle. Hashtag break the chains. Hashtag Matthews exposed. Crowds outside the station swelled. People were no longer just protesting. They were demanding resignations, investigations, reform. Women carried signs. "We are Danielle." Men shouted, "Protect black women." Children, too young to understand politics, but old enough to sense history, chanted her name. Danielle stood at the window, watching it all unfold. Tears welled in her eyes, not from weakness, but from the raw power of a people united. Meanwhile, Officer Matthews was escorted out in handcuffs, not as a defender of the law, but as a criminal of it. His once booming arrogance had shriveled into trembling silence. The cameras caught every second. The same chain he had wrapped around Danielle was now locked around his own wrists. For the first time in his life, Matthews felt the weight of being powerless. And Danielle, she didn't even look at him, because this was no longer just about him. It was bigger, so much bigger. Days later, Danielle found herself at a rally in downtown Atlanta. Tens of thousands had gathered. She took the stage, microphone in hand, the roar of the crowd vibrating through her bones. "Today we showed that no chain, no badge, no corrupt system is stronger than the truth," she declared. "But hear me when I say this is just the beginning. The crowd erupted in cheers. Justice isn't a gift. It's a fight. A fight that women like Danielle take on not just for themselves, but for generations to come. This story reminds us that silence protects the oppressor, never the oppressed. That when women stand together, when communities refuse to back down, chains are broken, not just the ones made of metal, but the ones built on fear. And to every woman watching, know this: your voice matters. Your story matters. You matter. So keep speaking, keep standing, keep fighting, because justice lives in persistence. If Danielle's story inspired you, don't let it end here. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What part of her fight hit you hardest? Hit that like button so more people can see stories that deserve to be heard. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel for more powerful, true stories about resilience, justice, and the hidden battles around us. Because together, we can shine light where darkness still hides.